This is the LUMINKEY Magger68 HE, a Hall effect-driven magnetic keyboard with a lot to like in a very compact 68-key package. And importantly, this is the first keyboard I've tried that's smaller than a 75% layout, and I kinda like it. Before we take a look at the Magger68 HE in detail though, I want to disclose that this keyboard was sent to me by LUMINKEY, so while I'll do my best to present my honest perspective, it's something you should know. That said, let's get into it. The Magger68 HE comes in two variations. This performance version that I have, which regularly retails for $119 USD, or a professional version that costs $149, but both are currently on sale while I'm making this video. The main differences between these versions is that the professional has a few chamfered edges on the top case, along with some metallic accents on the case top and bottom, and a different magnetic switch, the Gateron Jade Pros rather than the Gateron White Pros. Both come with the same three color options, an anodized champagne gold, black, or an E-Milky retro white, each of which has curated keycaps from Aloha KB to create a unique aesthetic. I ended up with the anodized black, and I quite like it, especially with the mix of tritone gray PBT keycaps paired with a few transparent polycarbonate escape and arrow keys. These have an OEM profile that pairs well with the Magger68's aggressively angled case, which tilts up at an angle of 7 degrees. This, along with the lower 16.5mm front edge height, make it very comfortable for typing, even if you opt to go without a palm rest to save desk space. The only reservation I have about the keycaps is that their dye sublimated legends, despite being nice and large, have a few line width inconsistencies that are noticeable if you go looking for them. Oh, and the legends printed on the transparent keys are raised enough that you can feel them easily, so I do wonder about their longevity. The Magger68 case, on the other hand, is fantastic. A lot of companies color their cases using an anodization process, but LUMINKEY manages to achieve a much smoother finish than most others that I've tried, which gives the case a very premium feel. It's hard to appreciate this over video, but here's a comparison to Keychron's Q1 HE, which has a far rougher, almost eggshell-like texture. The only con I've noticed with the Magger68's ultra-smooth black surface is that it can pick up some skin oils through repeated handling. Flipping the case over, we find a simple backside with some minor debossed branding, along with 4 silicon feet that, coupled with the 1.2 kilogram weight of the keyboard, give it a very secure positioning when in use. Finally, I'm always glad to see when companies include hex key screws to secure the base so that you can open and modify the keyboard easily. On the inside, the simple but well-crafted theme continues, as the Magger68's acoustic layering is much simpler than I've seen in quite a while, consisting of a precision-molded silicone slab in the case base and another sandwiched between the PCB and aluminum plate. Though I do like how this one wraps out and around the plate standoffs, allowing the keyboard's sandwich mount structure to act like an integrated gasket mounting system that's also a force break between the two halves of the case. It's simple, but well executed. The Magger68 HE also features snap-in and pre-lubricated plate mount stabilizers, as well as north-facing LED backlights that come pre-configured with 23 effects and that can switch between 8 predefined colors. Importantly, the backlight is handled by a separate chip to avoid any interference with keyboard latency while the lights are on. Speaking of which, in line with its gaming focus, the Magger68 HE only supports a wired connection. It would have been nice to see radio frequency or Bluetooth available, at least in the Pro version, but at least we get 8000 Hz wired polling and a latency quoted as 1/8 of a millisecond. And of course, we also have the analog benefits of magnetic switches. As I mentioned, this performance version of the Magger68 HE uses Gateron's magnetic White Pro dual rail switches, which have a linear force range ranging from 30 to 45 gram force along their 3.5mm path. And unlike traditional digital on-off magnetic switches, The magnet on the base of the stem creates a field whose intensity can be detected by the Hall effect sensors on the PCB, which allow for a continuous analog signal, which permits actuation point customization, among other features. But before we get into the software, let's have a listen. From a feel perspective, the stabilizers and switches are very smooth right out of the box, though at times I can hear a little bit of what might be spring ping coming from the switches. Otherwise, the Magger68 definitely leans more towards the crisp and clacky end of the acoustic spectrum rather than the deep and thocky end. This is likely because of the stiff aluminum plate and the internal use of silicone over foam, as there isn't anything to absorb those higher frequencies. That said, the case is accessible to allow for modification if you want to try to shape the sound differently. Not surprisingly, to make the most of the Magger68 HE's magnetic design, the keyboard's firmware is not QMK compatible. However, LUMINKEY has released an early version of an in-house software that can be used for most of the firmware modifications you'd want. Right away, we have the ability to change the keyboard's debounce sensitivity as well as its polling rate, which is nice to see. We also note that there are a total of 3 layers available for customization, which is a little on the lower end, but I've honestly never used more than 3 for productivity work, so this may be sufficient depending on how carried away you get with tuning the firmware to specific games. From the remapping tab, we have the ability to drag and drop keys from the bottom sections onto the upper keyboard silhouette to make changes to the mapping. LUMINKEY also provides a handy drop-down from the top with several OS and layout-specific pre-configurations. Next, from the Performance menu, we get into the first layer of magnetic features, like setting a custom actuation point for all, a group, or individual keys. This can be set in 20 micron increments ranging from 0.1 to 3.5 millimeters, and likewise you have the ability to assign key dead zones up to 0.5 millimeters, as well as various rapid trigger settings, both of which can be set again in 20 micron increments. This is also where you can indicate which switches are in use, as magnetic keyboards have limited switch compatibility and need to know which is being used in order to interpret the magnetic fields appropriately. And you can also recalibrate the keys here if necessary. Moving along to the Advanced menu, this is where you can test key responsiveness and where you can set up features that focus more on automating multiple action sequences. As of now, the Magger68 HE provides configurations for dynamic key paths, double click, which is essentially mod tap control, toggle switch, rappy snappy, and the controversial and now partially banned SOCD. Feel free to pause here if you want to read more about the descriptions of each. Personally, because I predominantly use my keyboards for productivity work, I like to use the mod tap control because it allows me to set secondary functions for keys that will activate when the key is held down. I find this particularly handy for smaller keyboards like this, where the function row is missing. Similar to my impressions of the low-free configurator software, I'm not particularly impressed by the macro capabilities of the Magger68 software. I've been spoiled by VIA compatibility and QMK keyboards, so I much prefer the syntax-based macro construction rather than these simpler macro recorders that only allow for sequential action automation. This is something I hope can be improved in the future as the software evolves. That said, the lighting controls offer quite a bit of customization for the backlight, as well as 24 ready-to-configure effects, which is nice to see. And I like that the configuration menu provides the ability not only to see, but also to update the keyboard firmware version, which is quite handy. I'm working with access to version 1.0.0.8 of the Magger68 software, which is adequate but still needs to iron out a few glitches. It's also only available for Windows as a standalone application at the moment. However, I'm told they will be deploying a more universal web app in the next month or so. That said, as always, I'd recommend you consider whether the functionality you need is present now, because you shouldn't be buying products on promises of updates. Overall, I think the Magger68 HE is an interesting keyboard, and I'm really glad that I tried it out because it's given me a great appreciation for more compact keyboards in general. I'd say that the physical build quality of this keyboard is what stands out the most to me, as the ultra-smooth anodized finish is really premium feeling, and I quite like the internal silicone mounting system, even if I would like to try tuning the acoustics a little bit more. I also think that it offers pretty reasonable value when stacked up against something like the Keychron Q2, a similar sized all-aluminum wired mechanical keyboard that starts at $179. The Q2 has the benefit of being QMK compatible, however it doesn't have a magnetic version yet, and that would likely result in a cost exceeding $200 without the same surface finish quality. But what do you think? Is the Magger68 HE worth checking out? If so, which version piques your interest? I'd also be interested to hear what other productivity users think of magnetic keyboards. I think they offer a lot of general benefits like mod tap, even if you don't take advantage of the gaming specific features. But I'm not sure if they're worth the limited switch compatibility trade-off. Otherwise, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.